Hey, it's Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to the present. Today we're going to pick up with Unit 11, the Cold War, and we're going to pick up with Lesson 3, the McCarthy era. It's going to be one of those controversial periods, of course, in American history where we're going to find that it's going to be a lot of paranoia, where people are going to think that their neighbors are communists, they're communists in the government, communists in the military, and it's all fueled by one man. But before we get to that, let's go through and look at a few things from the upcoming lesson. First, we're going to look at our unit focus question. Once again, unit focus questions are the ones that we answer at the end of the unit, and we will address this one at the end of this particular unit. The question says, what effect did the Cold War have on the United States and its relationship with other nations around the world? And describe American prosperity during the post-World War II period. We also have our vocabulary, academic and content. We will address these as they come up in the lesson, but as we always tell you, take your journals out, define these words yourself, and follow along as we continue throughout the lesson. All right, what we're going to do real quick, let's take a few minutes and look at our do now activity for today. Our do now activity, states define the term slander and libel in context of referring to the actions of a person. What we want you to do, of course, is take these two terms, put them in your journal, and then we'll come back in a few moments and ask you what you thought. Okay, you should have had enough time that you were able to address libel and slander. Now, we're going to talk about those two terms, libel and slander, in a few moments. But just to kind of give you a little bit of context, this whole unit is going to be centered around those two terms, libel and slander. Libel is when you write something, in a public forum that defames someone or doesn't tell the truth. And then slander, of course, is when you say something in a public forum that is untrue about a person. And all these, both of them, of course, can leave you open, of course, for damages. So we're going to find that throughout this Cold War period here, or the McCarthy era, or the Second Red Scare, it's going to be a lot of this kind of activity, of course, going on. What we're going to do now is pick up with the Second Red Scare. Now, we had a Red Scare right after World War I. It doesn't to get to the degree that this one that we have after World War II happens, because, and one thing that happens is America just gets out of World War II. Russia or the Soviet Union emerges as our chief enemy, and a lot of people believe that the Soviets or the Russians, whichever way you want to think about them, that they were trying to do what they could, of course, to infiltrate American government. So we're going to go through and look at a few seconds. The fear of communist subversion in the United States government started after the defection of a Soviet clerk in Canada by the name of Igor Guzhenko, who alerted Canada and the United States that the Soviet Union was trying to infiltrate both of their governments. The response to Guzhenko's claims led to Truman's loyalty review program. Now, what the loyalty review program did, if you worked in the federal government, you had to swear an allegiance or loyalty, of course, to the government, and you would be reviewed or investigated to find out if you had some communist ties or some communist sympathies. The HUAC investigations also occurred. The HUAC investigations centered around Hollywood, and what they were trying to do is trying to find out the people, of course, in Hollywood, of course, that were also communists. The Hollywood 10 were a group of Hollywood producers and actors, of course, that were blackballed because they refused to cooperate with the HUAC investigation when they were accused of being communists. The arrest of Alger Hiss, the arrest of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, and the creation of Project Venona kind of intensify or gives us some insights in terms of the degree to which most people believe that the government, of course, was infiltrated by communists. In the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the Soviets gained secrets to the American atomic bomb, and because of circumstantial evidence, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are accused, tried, and executed. Now, we find out a little bit later in the Project Venona files that's released much later that they indeed were spies, and they probably received a just punishment. The fear of communists caused unions, businesses, universities, and churches to try to identify and purge communists from their ranks. And this is a kind of a hysteria, kind of like the Salem witch trials, if you remember from your literature. People started saying it and started seeing communists everywhere, neighbors, family members. So it was a hysterical period in the history of American history. Here's a picture of Igor Guzhenko. He was a Soviet clerk, of course, that told the American government and the Canadian government about the Soviet activities to infiltrate our governments. Here's a picture of Whittaker Chambers. He's the man that accused Alger Hiss of passing secrets to the Soviets. Now, Hiss said, he didn't do it, and there was no proof that he did. Well, Chambers came up with something called the Pumpkin Papers, where he had actually taken the documents from Hiss and put them inside of a pumpkin. And when he was asked to produce those papers, he was able to produce those papers, and it indicated that Alger Hiss was indeed a communist and was indeed a communist spy. Here's a picture of Alger Hiss on the left, testifying before Congress, and on the right you have Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, of course, who are just before they get tried, as they're awaiting trial. The rise of Joseph McCarthy. The one singular figure in American history that's probably responsible for most of this hysteria is a little-known senator from Wisconsin by the name of Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy was a little-known senator from Wisconsin that used American fears of communism to gain fame in American politics. He accused anyone who he thought could elevate his political profile, including the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, General George C. Marshall, who was the architect of the Marshall Plan. He was also the U.S. Army Chief of Staff during World War II. So anybody that he thought that could elevate his political career, the one thing that he did most of the time, of course, without any proof, is he accused him of being communist. Now what it did is it elevated his profile. McCarthy's accusations led to the passage of the McCarran Act, which made it illegal to try to turn the United States into a totalitarian nation and required all communist organizations to register with the United States Attorney General's office. McCarthy's downfall did happen, though, when televised hearings were held after he accused members of the U.S. military of being communists. His accusations were exposed, and he fell from grace, ending McCarthyism in America. Once again, he made a lot of unfounded accusations. He was the squeakiest wheel on the wagon, and because of that, he got more and more attention from the American public. And he's finally found out when these televised hearings are held. And when looking at this particular picture, if you look at this young man right here, and then you look at this lady in the back here, they kind of give you an indication of how seriously they took the Welch-McCarthy hearings and the things that he was saying. American reaction to McCarthyism. The fear stoked by McCarthy, the Soviets creating their hydrogen bomb in 1949, and the fall of China to communists caused many Americans to fear the destruction they had seen with Hiroshima and made them suspicious of each other. So you had neighbors that were accusing neighbors, of course, or suspicious of neighbors possibly even being communists. The hydrogen bomb changed things for most Americans, making life tenuous during the 1950s. The fear of the bomb caused hysteria as some Americans built bomb shelters in their backyards and fallout shelters were erected in government buildings. American art and literature centered around the bomb and the spies, making Americans long for peace and security. So when you look at it, once again, this is a real legitimate fear in most Americans' minds in the 1950s that the communists were coming and there could possibly be a nuclear war, and you had to do whatever you could, of course, to get prepared. So one of the things that they did, of course, is they created family fallout shelters, or these bunkers in their backyards or underneath their houses in the basements. They were usually encased, of course, in cement or cinder blocks so that they could withstand the initial bomb blast, and also enough food, in this particular case, 14 days in this particular pantry, so that they can last 14 days for the fallout, of course, to clear. The attack on Josephine Baker. Anyone could have been a target, of course, and be accused, of course, of being a spy, including Josephine Baker, who had been a citizen of the United States of America, but had moved to France and was an entertainer there, and did a lot to help the American and the Allied war effort, especially the French, during World War II. Matter of fact, she's decorated by the French government for her efforts against the Nazis as a spy for France during WW2. Now, she will be accused of being a communist also when she does some things, of course, that in the minds of Walter Winchell, who was one that made the biggest claim against her. He was a writer that made this claim because of a personal falling out that they had. What we want to do is pause for a few minutes, and what we're going to do is allow you, of course, to look at this video of the accusations against Josephine Baker. And at this time, we will allow you to access this video in the video description and take a look. It didn't matter who you were, even if you were Josephine Baker, war hero, citizen, of course, of this country, citizen of France. you could be accused, and in most cases, of course, it could ruin your life, of course, in the United States of America. Josephine Baker, after her accusations are made against her, she, formally gives up her citizenship, moves to France, of course, and spends the rest of her days, of course, in France. Here are the two lesson-focused questions that we had earlier. It says, identify actions of Joseph McCarthy during the Second Rescue Year in America and describe life in nuclear age America following the end of World War II. Well, let's look at the possible answers to these. Well, when we look at the actions of McCarthy, he accused ranking government officials of being communists and stated that communists had infiltrated the military. He did these things without any evidence, and it created hysteria throughout the American government and throughout American society. The second question is, describe life in the nuclear age following the end of World War II. Well, Americans were fearful, and you can see why, because you look at the devastation at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when you have 250,000 people that are killed from 2 bomb blasts, you can see how Americans, of course, will be a little bit on edge. And as a result of that, we're going to find that neighbors will be fearful of one another, and they'll accuse each other, of course, of being spies for the Soviet Union. All right, that's Unit 3, the McCarthy era in the United States of America. And once again, it's one of those dark periods in American history where we have neighbors accusing neighbors, and we have everybody seeing communists, of course, at every turn. So what we want you to do, of course, is what we always tell you to do. Don't take my word for it. Go ahead and do your own research and make up your own mind and draw your own conclusions. And with that, we'll see you next time. This is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We'll see you next time.